The crimson emergency lights bathed the bridge of the FCV Vanguard in an ominous glow as Captain Mara Thorne studied the tactical display before her. The multi-species reconnaissance vessel belonged to the Orion Alliance, a confederation that had existed for several centuries since humanity first joined the galactic community. Despite their relatively recent addition to the Alliance, humans had proven themselves capable commanders, though not everyone in the galaxy was convinced of their strategic prowess. "Captain, we're receiving a distress signal from Mining Station Kappa 7, announced Lieutenant Faye KX, her 8 arachnoid legs clicking against the deck as she manipulated multiple control interfaces simultaneously. The spider-like being's compound eyes reflected the tactical readouts as she processed the incoming data streams. "The transmission is fragmented, but I'm detecting signs of heavy weapons fire and possible structural damage." Thorne leaned forward in her command chair, her weathered hands gripping the armrests. At 42, she had earned her position through a combination of tactical brilliance and an uncanny ability to make split-second decisions under pressure. Her dark hair was pulled back in a regulation bun, and her brown eyes held the steady gaze of someone who had seen too many battles. "How far out are we from their position?" she asked, her voice cutting through the bridge's ambient hum. "Approximately 14 minutes at current velocity," replied Lieutenant Gersar from the engineering station. The Mulag officer's thick gray hide glistened under the bridge lighting as his massive hands worked the propulsion controls. Despite their imposing appearance, the Mulag were known for their engineering expertise and calm demeanor under pressure. "Ma'am," Faye KX's voice carried a note of concern. "I'm also detecting unidentified vessels in the vicinity of the mining station. Configuration doesn't match any known Alliance or civilian patterns." Thorne's jaw tightened. Kappa 7 was positioned on the frontier edge of the Orion Arm, a strategic location that served as both a mining operation and an early warning post. An attack there could signal something far more serious than simple piracy. "Major Vrex, report to the bridge immediately," Thorne commanded through the ship's communication system. Within moments, the bridge doors hissed open, and Vrex entered with the fluid grace that marked all Cathaxians. Standing nearly 8 feet tall, the reptilian humanoid was a prime example of his species' evolution as apex predators. His scaled hide was a deep emerald green with darker patterns that seemed to shift subtly in the light. Most striking were his eyes, golden orbs with vertical pupils that could track multiple targets simultaneously. His powerful hands ended in retractable claws that could rend metal, and his muscular frame spoke of countless generations of evolutionary refinement for hunting and combat. "Captain." Vrex's voice was a low rumble, his command of human speech accented by the unique vocal structure of his species. "I came as soon as I received your summons. We have a situation, Major. Kappa 7 is under attack by unknown hostiles. I need your tactical assessment." Vrex moved to the tactical display, his predatory instincts automatically analyzing the data. His species had joined the Alliance only 50 years ago, and many still viewed them with a mixture of awe and apprehension. The Cathaxians were warriors by nature, having evolved as the dominant predators on their home world of Cathax Prime. Their integration into the Alliance had been challenging, as their natural inclination was to solve problems through overwhelming force. The attacking vessels appeared to be modified cargo haulers. Vrex observed his claws unconsciously extending as he studied the display. "But the weapon signatures suggest military-grade armaments. This is not a random pirate raid, Captain. Someone has equipped these ships specifically for siege warfare." Thorne nodded grimly. "My thoughts exactly. The question is who and why Kappa 7. "Captain," Faye KX interrupted, "I'm picking up a partial transmission from the station, audio only heavily distorted." "Put it through." The bridge speakers crackled with static before a desperate human voice broke through. "Under heavy fire. Main reactor compromised. Requesting immediate assistance. Unknown bioweapon detected. Oh God, they're inside the station." The transmission cut to static, leaving the bridge in tense silence. "But bioweapon," Thorne's voice was sharp. Major, what's your assessment? Vrex's eyes narrowed his predatory senses, picking up the tension that filled the bridge. If they're using biological agents, this is not a simple raid. Someone wants whatever is in that station badly enough to risk violating the Geneva Accords of 2387. Recommendations. The Cathaxians' response was immediate and instinctive. We go in fast and hard, overwhelming force before they can complete whatever they're doing. Thorne studied the tactical display, weighing their options. Standard Alliance protocol would be to call for backup and wait for a full task force. But the people on Kappa 7 didn't have time for protocol. Lieutenant Gersar, maximum velocity to Kappa 7. All hands to battle stations. The Mulog's thick fingers danced across his controls as the Vanguard's engines roared to life. Throughout the ship, alarm klaxons sounded as the crew prepared for combat. Captain, Faye KX's voice carried a note of concern. Shouldn't we wait for reinforcements? There are at least 6 hostile vessels, and we don't know their full capabilities. Thorne's expression hardened. Those people don't have time for us to follow proper procedure. Sometimes you have to trust your instincts and act. Vrex watched the human captain with growing interest. His species respected strength and decisive action, and Thorne was displaying both. Still, his tactical training suggested caution. Captain, perhaps we should at least inform Alliance Command of our intentions. We'll send a message drone once we're in position. Right now, speed is our best weapon. As the Vanguard hurtled through space toward the embattled mining station, Thorne found herself reflecting on the unusual nature of her crew. The Alliance had been experimenting with mixed-species vessels for the past decade, believing that the diverse capabilities of different races could create more effective fighting units. The results had been mixed with cultural misunderstandings and conflicting tactical philosophies, often hampering effectiveness. Captain, Faye KX announced, "We're approaching the target zone. I'm reading 7 hostile vessels, not 6. 2 appear to be modified heavy cruisers." The tactical display updated, showing the mining station surrounded by attacking ships. Kappa 7 itself was a massive structure, part asteroid mining facility and part research station. Bright flashes indicated ongoing weapons fire, and several sections of the station showed signs of severe damage. Major Vrex, I want boarding teams prepared immediately. We're going to dock with the station and extract any survivors. Boarding teams. Vrex's tone carried surprise. Captain, standard tactics would suggest we eliminate the hostile vessels first. Standard tactics take time we don't have. Those people are dying in there. Vrex's predatory instincts warred with his respect for chain of command. Everything in his nature screamed that they should destroy the threats first, then worry about survivors. But something about the human captain's certainty gave him pause. As you command, Captain, I'll prepare my assault teams. The Vanguard entered the combat zone like a predator stalking its prey. Thorne's tactical display lit up with target locks and weapon signatures as the hostile vessels detected their approach. Incoming missiles, Faye KX announced. Multiple launches from the lead cruiser. Evasive maneuvers, return fire on my mark. The ship shuddered as Gersar threw the Vanguard into a spiraling dive that would have been impossible for a larger vessel. The attacking missiles streaked past their proximity sensors, confused by the unexpected maneuver. Target the cruiser's weapon arrays, Thorne commanded. Disable, don't destroy. I want to know who's behind this. The Vanguard's pulse cannons lanced out precise beams of energy that sliced through the enemy ship's weapon systems with surgical precision. Thorne's experience showed in every tactical decision her understanding of three-dimensional combat, allowing her to position the Vanguard advantageously while minimizing damage to the mining station. Captain Vrex reported from the tactical station, "My teams are ready for deployment, but I must advise against boarding while we're still under fire." Noted, Major, but we're going in anyway. The Cathaxian's eyes flashed with what might have been admiration or concern. Your species has an interesting definition of acceptable risk, Captain. Sometimes acceptable risk is the only option we have. As the Vanguard continued its deadly dance through the combat zone, Thorne maneuvered the ship toward Kappa 7's docking bay. The station's automated defenses had fallen silent, and several sections showed signs of catastrophic decompression. "Docking bay is compromised," Faye KX reported. "But I'm reading life signs in the research section. Approximately 40 survivors." "Major, take your team in through the maintenance airlocks. Find those survivors and get them out." Vrex hesitated for a moment, his predatory instincts analyzing the tactical situation. Everything about the scenario screamed trap, but the human captain's conviction was absolute. "I'll need precise covering fire to reach the station safely." "You'll have it." As Vrex's boarding team prepared to launch, the Vanguard continued to engage the hostile vessels. One of the modified cargo haulers had been disabled, but the others were adapting to Thorn's tactics. Energy blasts and missile salvos filled the space around the mining station as the battle intensified. "Launch when ready, Major." Vrex's assault pod streaked toward the mining station, followed by two more carrying his team members. The pods were designed for rapid insertion into hostile territory, their armored hulls capable of withstanding moderate weapons fire. Inside the lead pod, Vrex felt the familiar rush of approaching combat. His enhanced senses were already processing potential threats and opportunities, his predatory nature asserting itself as he prepared to face unknown enemies. But something felt different this time. Instead of the usual anticipation of the hunt, he found himself thinking about the human captain's orders and her apparent faith in his abilities. The pods struck the station's hull near the maintenance airlocks, their magnetic clamps securing them in place, as cutting torches began working on the outer doors. Within minutes, Vrex and his team were inside the station's maintenance corridors. The interior of Kappa 7 was a maze of industrial passages and mining equipment. Emergency lighting cast strange shadows as the team moved deeper into the station. Vrex's enhanced hearing picked up the sound of distant weapons fire and what might have been screams. "Team Alpha, this is Major Vrex. We're inside the station and proceeding toward the research section." Thorn's voice crackled through his communicator. "Copy that, Major. Be advised, I'm reading multiple heat signatures converging on your position. You're not alone in there." Vrex's team consisted of 5 other Alliance soldiers, 2 humans, a Mulog engineer, and 2 more Cathaxians. The mixed composition reflected the Alliance's ongoing experiment with integrated units, though Vrex sometimes wondered if the cultural differences created more problems than they solved. As they moved through the station's corridors, Vrex began to notice something troubling. The damage patterns they encountered weren't consistent with standard ship-to-ship weapons. Blast marks on the walls suggested portable energy weapons, but the residual energy signatures were unlike anything he'd encountered before. "Captain," he reported through his communicator, "the weapon signatures in here are unusual. This isn't standard military hardware." "Can you identify the attackers?" "Negative. But whoever they are, they're using modified energy weapons, possibly experimental technology." The team rounded a corner and found themselves face to face with the first of the station's attackers. The figure was humanoid, but wore full environmental armor that concealed any identifying features. Most disturbing was the weapon it carried, a sleek energy rifle that seemed to pulse with an internal light. The attacker raised its weapon, but Vrex's predatory reflexes were faster. His powerful legs launched him forward in a leap that carried him across the corridor in a single bound. His claws extended automatically as he struck, rending the attacker's armor and ending the threat in seconds. "Unknown hostiles confirmed," he reported. "Armor and weapons are definitely not standard issue." As the team continued deeper into the station, they encountered more attackers. Each engagement revealed the same pattern: humanoid figures in advanced armor, carrying weapons that seemed to be several generations ahead of current Alliance technology. "Major," one of his human team members called out, "I'm reading massive energy signatures from the research section. Something big is powering up in there." Vrex's enhanced senses were picking up something else, a scent that made his predatory instincts scream warnings. There was something unnatural in the air, a chemical signature that his species' evolutionary history associated with danger. "Captain, I'm detecting possible biological contamination in the research section. Recommend extreme caution. Thorne's voice was tight with concern. What kind of biological agent? Unknown, but my senses are warning me of significant danger. The team approached the research section cautiously, their weapons raised and their senses alert. When they finally reached the main laboratory, what they found exceeded their worst fears. The laboratory was a scene of controlled chaos. Research equipment had been hastily reconfigured into what appeared to be a biological weapons manufacturing setup. Large tanks contained bubbling liquids of various colors, connected by a maze of tubes and processing equipment. Several bodies in research clothing lay scattered around the room, apparently killed, while trying to prevent whatever was happening. "Dear gods," whispered the Mulag engineer. "They've turned the entire research section into a bioweapons factory." Vrex's predatory senses were in overdrive, every instinct telling him to flee from the unnatural threat. But his training and his loyalty to the Alliance held him in place. "Captain, we have a problem. The hostiles have converted the research lab into some kind of biological weapons facility. I'm counting at least 12 large containment tanks, all active. Can you identify the agents?" "Negative. But whatever they're producing, it's not natural. My species' senses are screaming warnings." As Vrex and his team moved deeper into the laboratory, they discovered the true scope of the operation. The attackers hadn't just seized the station. They had specifically targeted it for its research capabilities. Kappa 7's legitimate research into extremophile bacteria had been perverted into something far more sinister. "Major," called out one of the Cathaxian team members, "I'm reading life signs in the sealed clean room. Multiple humans, possibly the surviving researchers." The clean room was protected by multiple airlocks and containment protocols. But the attacking force had placed explosive charges around the outer door, apparently planning to breach it once their biological weapons were ready. "They're going to use the survivors as test subjects," Vrex realized with horror. The team began working to disable the explosive charges, but the sound of approaching footsteps indicated that the attackers had discovered their presence. Within moments, the laboratory erupted in weapons fire as multiple hostiles poured into the room. The battle that followed was unlike anything Vrex had experienced before. The attackers moved with inhuman coordination, their advanced weapons capable of penetrating most standard armor. Worse, their tactics suggested they were willing to risk damage to their own biological weapons facility, a level of fanaticism that spoke to the importance of their mission. As the firefight intensified, one of the containment tanks took a direct hit. Alarms began blaring as toxic vapors started leaking into the laboratory atmosphere. "Major," Thorne's voice crackled through his communicator. "I'm reading a containment breach. Get your people out of there." But Vrex found himself frozen by a conflict between his predatory instincts and his duty. Every fiber of his being screamed at him to flee from the biological threat, but he couldn't abandon the survivors in the clean room. His species had evolved to avoid such dangers, not confront them. In that moment of hesitation, he did something that would become legendary throughout the Alliance. Instead of trusting his own predatory instincts, the apex predator turned to his human commander for guidance. "Captain," he called out over the weapon fire and alarms. "What are your orders?" The question came out as a roar that could be heard across the battlefield, his powerful voice cutting through the chaos. The attacking force paused, momentarily surprised by the unexpected communication. Thorne's response was immediate and precise. "Secure the clean room. Evacuate the survivors. Don't let them complete whatever they're doing." With his orders clear, Vrex's uncertainty vanished. He no longer had to choose between conflicting instincts. He had his mission. The powerful Cathaxian warrior launched himself across the laboratory, like a living missile, his claws extended, and his predatory grace on full display. His team followed his lead, inspired by their commander's decisive action. The attackers found themselves facing not just superior firepower, but warriors who were now fighting with absolute clarity of purpose. Working with methodical precision, the team neutralized the remaining hostiles, while simultaneously working to contain the biological threat. the Mulog engineer, proved invaluable his technical expertise, allowing him to shut down the weapons production facility before more contamination could occur. Within the clean room, they found 18 surviving researchers huddled behind makeshift barricades. Dr. Elena Vasquez, the station's chief biologist, was among them. "Major," she gasped, as Vrex helped her to her feet. "Thank God you're here. They were going to use us to test their biological weapons. They said something about destabilizing the entire Orion arm." "Who are they, Dr.?" "I'm not sure, but I overheard references to the new Orion separatist movement. They're trying to create weapons that target specific species biology." Vrex's blood ran cold. The implications were staggering. Biological weapons designed to target individual Alliance species could destroy the delicate cooperation that held the Confederation together. "Captain," he reported, "we need immediate evacuation, and we need to ensure this facility is completely destroyed." "Understood, Major. Can you make it to the docking bay?" "The main docking bay is too dangerous, but I can get us to the emergency evacuation pods." As Vrex led the survivors through the station's compromised corridors, he found himself marveling at the clarity that had come from following the human captain's orders. His species' evolution as solitary hunters had never prepared them for the complex decision-making required in multi-species operations. But Thorne's leadership had provided the framework he needed to overcome his natural limitations. The evacuation proceeded smoothly until they reached the pod bay. There they encountered the final group of attackers, apparently the leaders of the operation who had been overseeing the final stages of weapons production. These enemies were different from the others. Their armor was more advanced, their weapons more powerful, and their movements suggested extensive combat experience. Worse, they had taken positions that allowed them to cover both the evacuation pods and the route back to the main station. "Major," one of his team members called out, "we're pinned down. Those positions are too well defended." Vrex assessed the situation with his predatory senses. The enemy positions were indeed formidable, and any direct assault would result in heavy casualties. But something about the tactical setup troubled him. It was too perfect, too well prepared. "Captain," he called through his communicator, "I believe this may be a trap. The enemy positions are too advantageous to be coincidental. Can you break through?" Again, Vrex found himself faced with competing instincts. His natural predatory nature suggested a direct assault, but his growing understanding of human tactical thinking suggested a more subtle approach. "What would you do, Captain?" The question surprised him, even as he asked it. Never before had a Cathaxian warrior asked for tactical advice in the middle of combat. But something about Thorne's approach to leadership had convinced him that human thinking might offer solutions his own instincts couldn't provide. "Create a diversion," came the immediate response. "Make them think you're coming from a different direction." Following Thorne's guidance, Vrex split his team into two groups. While one group created a noisy demonstration near the main entrance, he led a smaller team through the station's maintenance shafts to flank the enemy positions. The tactic worked perfectly. The attackers, expecting a direct assault from the superior force, were caught completely off guard when Vrex and two of his warriors emerged behind their lines. The battle was over in minutes, with the enemy leadership either dead or captured. As the evacuation pods launched from the station, carrying the survivors, Vrex remained behind with a small team to set demolition charges. The biological weapons facility had to be completely destroyed to prevent the research from falling into other hands. "Major," Thorne's voice carried a note of urgency. "I'm reading massive power fluctuations from the station's reactor. Whatever those charges are doing, they're destabilizing the entire structure." "Understood, Captain. We're almost finished." But as they placed the final charges, the station's compromised reactor began to cascade toward critical failure. What should have been a controlled demolition was turning into a potential catastrophe that could spread contamination across the entire sector. "Emergency evacuation now," Thorne commanded. Vrex and his team ran for their assault pods, but it quickly became clear they wouldn't make it in time. The reactor's failure was accelerating beyond all predictions, and the biological contamination was spreading faster than their containment protocols could handle. Captain Vrex reported knowing it might be his final transmission. "We're not going to make it. But the mission is complete. The weapons facility will be destroyed." "Like hell you're not making it. Lieutenant Gersar, emergency beam out. Lock onto Major Vrex's team and get them aboard now." The Mulog's response came immediately. "Transport initiating. Stand by for beam out." The familiar tingle of Alliance transport technology enveloped Vrex and his team, just as the station's reactor reached critical failure. They materialized on the Vanguard's transport pad as Kappa 7 erupted in a brilliant explosion that lit up the surrounding space. As the Vanguard pulled away from the expanding debris field, Vrex made his way to the bridge. He found Captain Thorne standing before the main display, watching the destruction of what had once been a peaceful research station. "Mission accomplished, Captain," he reported, standing at attention. Thorne turned to face him, and he saw something in her expression that he'd never encountered before from a human. Genuine respect from one warrior to another. "Outstanding work, Major. Your quick thinking saved those researchers and prevented a potential biological catastrophe." "With respect, Captain, it was your guidance that made the difference. When faced with conflicting instincts, I found that following your orders provided the clarity I needed to act effectively." The bridge fell silent as the implications of Rex's words sank in. An apex predator, a member of a species that had ruled their homeworld through individual strength and hunting prowess, had chosen to defer to human leadership in the heat of combat. "Major," Thorne said quietly, "in my experience, the best leaders are those who know when to listen to others. And the best soldiers are those who know when to follow orders regardless of their own instincts." Dr. Ulvac, the ship's xenobiologist, stepped forward from his station. "Captain, I've completed my analysis of the biological agents we encountered. The Separatists were indeed developing species-specific weapons. If they had succeeded, they could have targeted any Alliance race with surgical precision." "How close were they to success?" "Uncomfortably close. Another few days and they would have had viable weapons." Thorne nodded grimly. "Lieutenant Fay KX, prepare a full report for Alliance Command. Include all tactical data and biological analysis." "Already prepared, Captain," the arachnoid officer replied. "I've also compiled Major Vrex's combat footage. Command will want to review the effectiveness of mixed-species boarding operations." As the Vanguard set course for the nearest Alliance base, Thorne found herself reflecting on what had happened. The mission had been successful, but more importantly, it had demonstrated something that Alliance theorists had long debated: whether different species could truly function as integrated military units. "Major," she said to Vrex, "I'd like your assessment of our operation." The Cathaxian considered her question carefully. "Captain, my species has always believed that strength comes from individual superiority. We hunt alone, we fight alone, and we succeed or fail based on our own abilities. But today, I learned something different." "What's that?" "I learned that sometimes the greatest strength comes from knowing when to rely on others. When my instincts failed me, your guidance provided the clarity I needed. When your tactics required abilities, I possessed my strength, complemented your strategy. Together, we accomplished something neither of us could have achieved alone." Fay KX looked up from her station. "Captain, I'm receiving a priority transmission from Alliance Command." "Put it through!" The main display shifted to show Admiral Sarah Chen, commander of the Orion Defense Force. The elderly human's face was grim as she reviewed the mission report. "Captain Thorne, excellent work. The biological weapons facility has been completely destroyed, and the surviving research data will help us identify other potential targets. However, I'm afraid this attack was just the beginning." "Sir, intelligence suggests the new Orion separatist movement has cells throughout the frontier sectors. They're planning a coordinated campaign to destabilize the Alliance through targeted biological warfare." Thorne felt a chill run down her spine. "What are our orders, Admiral?" "The Vanguard is being reassigned to counterintelligence operations. Your mission will be to identify and neutralize separatist cells before they can deploy their weapons. Given the multi-species nature of the threat, your integrated crew makes you ideal for this assignment. As the transmission ended, Vrex stepped forward. Captain, if I may. Go ahead, Major. I believe our success today demonstrates the potential for alliance cooperation, but it also reveals our greatest vulnerability. How so? The separatists are counting on our differences to divide us. They believe that species loyalty will overcome alliance unity. By proving them wrong, by showing that an apex predator can follow human leadership when the situation demands it, we've struck a blow against their core philosophy. Thorn nodded slowly. You're right, Major. They're betting on our inability to work together. Every successful mission we complete as an integrated unit damages their credibility. Dr. Ulvac looked up from his biological analysis. Captain, there's something else. The weapons facility was too sophisticated for the separatists to have built alone. Someone with advanced biotechnology is supporting them. Any leads on who? The biocontainment protocols were based on hegemony designs. It's possible they've allied themselves with elements from outside the Alliance. The mention of the hegemony, the Alliance's primary rival in this sector of the galaxy, cast their mission in an even more serious light. If external powers were supporting the separatist movement, the threat to Alliance stability was far greater than anyone had realized. Lieutenant Gersar Thorn commanded set course for Alpha Station. We need to brief command in person. As the Vanguard jumped to hyperspace carrying news of the growing separatist threat, the image of Rex deferring to human command began spreading through Alliance channels. The sight of the galaxy's most feared predatory species asking a human for orders became a powerful symbol of Alliance unity. Within days, the footage would be broadcast throughout the Orion Arm, inspiring mixed-species crews and challenging the separatist narrative that Alliance cooperation was impossible. The new Orion separatist movement had hoped to create division through biological warfare, but instead, they had inadvertently provided the Alliance with one of its most powerful symbols of unity. In the weeks that followed, recruitment for mixed-species units increased dramatically. Young beings from across the Alliance volunteered to serve alongside species they had once feared or misunderstood. The image of the apex predator running to the human for orders became a rallying cry for cooperation over conflict. For Vrex himself, the mission had been transformative. His species' traditional emphasis on individual strength had given way to a new understanding of collective power. He began developing new training protocols that emphasized cooperation between species, drawing on the unique strengths each race brought to combat situations. Captain Thorn, meanwhile, found herself at the center of a new doctrine of Alliance military strategy. Her approach to leadership, which emphasized trust, clear communication, and the intelligent use of diverse abilities, became the model for integrated command structures throughout the fleet. The biological weapons threat continued to evolve with new separatist cells discovered throughout the frontier regions. But each successful mission by mixed-species units, like the Vanguard's crew, served to strengthen Alliance unity and undermine separatist ideology. Years later, military historians would point to the Kappa 7 incident as the turning point in the Alliance's approach to multi-species cooperation. The sight of a predator seeking guidance from its commander had demonstrated that true strength came not from individual dominance, but from the wisdom to know when to lead and when to follow. The new Orion separatist movement would eventually be defeated, their biological weapons programs dismantled, and their cells scattered. But their greatest failure had been in underestimating the power of cooperation between species. They had assumed that evolutionary differences would prove stronger than shared values, but they had been proven catastrophically wrong. The Alliance emerged from the crisis stronger and more unified than ever before, with integrated military units becoming the standard rather than the exception. The lessons learned from the Vanguard's crew, that diversity was a source of strength rather than weakness, became fundamental principles of Alliance doctrine. And at the heart of it all was the simple image that had started it all, the moment when the galaxy's most fearsome predator had chosen to trust in human leadership, rather than rely solely on his own instincts. It was a moment that changed everything, proving that true strength sometimes meant having the wisdom to ask for orders rather than always giving them.